Okay, with InDesign open, the first thing that we need to do is identify the parts of a magazine cover. And so I've given you a little tutorial, and these images are in color with the PDF that's on Canvas. But I want you to know the terminology so when you see it in the exercise, you know what it's referring to. So there's 5 main pieces of a cover. You have the images, and they are typically going to bleed off onto the edges, but they don't have to. You might have a border of color, and oftentimes you have a full face or some type of body shot. However, that's not always the case. Then secondly, you have a masthead. So this is the name of the publication that's at the top of the page. So when you see, for example, on the page, there's Elle Magazine. The word Elle is the masthead, and that's something that stays constant on the magazine every month. And it could change color, but it stays like that. Generally, you may see that the image might overlap the text a little bit, either on top of or under it. It just kind of depends on how you lay it out. Third, you have the cover lines. So these are the titles of the articles, and then the means to entice the reader. So you have them arranged around the cover image. They can overlap the cover image. You just have to decide how that works. And typically when you have cover lines, they correspond to the colors in the cover image. And so you'll sample those colors from the image. And then fourth, you have the date and the price. It needs to be very understated but readable. And then it should be set against a quiet portion of the background so that it stands out a bit. Lastly, you have what's known as flashes and slashes. So a flash is presented as a diagonal banner across the top corner. And it can also take the form of a sticker or some type of circular shape, so it looks like you have something stuck on the cover. And those are just additional little things to catch your eye. So that's the terminology we're working with today. So if you flip over to page 2, we are going to get started with creating a cover. To do that, you are going to open the 17 start file in InDesign. So I am going to, let's see. Whoops. Oh, where's this going? Okay, one second. Okay, there we go. When you open the 17 start file, you should have something that looks like this. So we're going to start by saving this as 17 working. As soon as you've done this, let's review a little bit about the page layout before we move forward, because this is going to function differently than the other documents we've been working with. So the black outline around the page, so this area that forms the white page, just that border, that is the edge of the physical paper when it prints. And this is important right now because you have to pay attention to the fact that in magazines, most things carry over not to the margin, but to the page edge. So you want to be making sure that when you create your layout, you're taking into account this area between the margin, these purple lines, and the black edge, which is the physical edge of the page. And when we set up a document, and in this case, when I set up the 17 start document, I just left the margins at default. That's fine. You can set your margins to whatever you like. They could even be a bit smaller if you want. For section 2, we're going to set guides to start creating the masthead. And for any type of publication work, you should always have your rulers visible. To get started, make sure that you can see your rulers. So you should see a ruler up here along the top edge and along the vertical left edge. If you don't see that, go up to view, and then you should, if they're not showing, see show rulers here. But because mine are showing, you can hide rulers instead. Now, I want you to notice that there is a sample magazine cover located on the right side of the pasteboard. So choose the selection tool and there's my tools. Select that image and then place it over the page so that it covers it, and it is sized to perfectly cover the page. And then we are going to draw guidelines around the Glamour masthead so that we start to get a sense of how big we want our masthead to be. So to make those guides, I'm going to go to this dark gray area where I see the little notches on the ruler, click, hold, drag, and then a guide is put in place. So I'm going to make mine just a little bit lower than the Glamour so that I have a tiny bit of area on the top. So you can use this as a guide. You don't necessarily have to make it exact. Then I'm going to do another one. So I'm going to start it maybe a little bit down from where the G is. And then I'm going to go to the side and drag a ruler from that left vertical ruler, or drag a guide from the left vertical ruler. And you can decide when you're creating a masthead, do you want it to meet the margin line, or do you want it to be closer to the edge? Typically, it's going to start closer to the edge, as you can see in this example. And so for our purposes, let's just go ahead and make it close to the edge. Then the last one we're going to drag is going to be to form that right edge. When you're finished, you should have guidelines that form a box where the masthead will be. When you've done that, use the selection tool and move the sample magazine cover off to the side again. So this is going to be our guide as we make our measurements and form what we're going to create. I've chosen just a sample magazine cover, but I want you to make note of the fact that you can choose any magazine cover you want when you're doing this. It helps to scan in an image and have it on the pasteboard like this, so that then you can use it like this as a guide when you want to create any type of section on the page. Going to section 3, we're going to add the masthead. Let's choose the type tool. And with that tool active, we are going to click, hold, and drag a text frame that is the size of the enclosed area for the masthead. So I'm going to start in this upper left corner and then click, hold, drag to the size that we created with the guide. When you release your mouse, or if you click once in the box, depending on how your computer works with it, you'll see a blinking cursor. And I want you to type Athleisure Adventures in this box. And I'm going to zoom in a bit so we can see this in more detail. Now is the time when we'll start formatting the text a bit so that it takes on that stylized or designed look that a cover should have. So with the text tool active, I'm going to highlight that text. I'm going to begin by changing the font to Cambria. So Mac users, I was told that you have Cambria. Do you?
Yes.
No? Oh no, I must have been talking to people that had downloaded it. Okay, so you're gonna choose something that looks just similar. So look, you can see mine or the person that's sitting next to you.
Cambria, I know I have it down. I have Cambria.
I don't.
I don't.
Okay, some do and some don't.
Yeah.
So here's what Cambria looks like. So if you just try and approximate something that looks somewhat like that, that's totally fine. The next thing we're going to do is bold the text. So to do that, I need to highlight it, again, with my text tool active. And then I'm going to go to this panel just below where the font drop-down menu is in the options toolbar. And then I'm going to choose bold.
Where's the sign-in sheet?
If you're using a Mac and you've chosen a different font than Cambria, make sure that you have a font that will allow you to bold it. And if it won't let you bold it, bold will not be an option in this drop-down menu. The next thing we're going to do is change the font size to 66. So remember that our font size is controlled up in the options toolbar with the two uppercase T's and one is smaller than the other. So instead of using my up arrow and pressing it a bunch of times, I'm just going to highlight the default text size and type in 66 and then hit enter. And you'll see that it has gotten quite large. And we have a little red plus on the side of our text frame, which means that there is some of the text that's existing out of sight. We need to change that so that we can see everything. So we're going to move to step 6 and create a soft break between the words. So to do that, remember that you hit backspace to remove the space between the words, hold down the shift key, and then press enter. And we still have our little red plus. So we're going to change that a little bit to fit our specifications and choose the selection tool to make sure that both of our words now fit. So just drag it down a little bit. Then you can flip over to page 3. The next step in formatting our text is going to be to change the alignment. So I'm going to switch back to my type tool. I'm going to highlight the text, and then up in the options bar at the top of the screen, you'll see these little alignments. These are the same icons that you would see in, say, Microsoft Word. We're going to choose Align Center. So then it should look like this. Remember that most of these options can be also accessed through the paragraph or character panels. And to get there, you need to go to Window, Types and Tables, and then Paragraph or Character. So if you want to have those open and just collapse them in this right side panel menu, you can do that. But that's up to you. Next, we're going to change the leading value to 50. So leading is going to be this icon here that's right below the text size. Leading is going to be the space between the lines. So we're going to change this to 50. And again, you can do the same thing as you did with the font size. You can just, instead of using the up and down arrows or the drop down, you can click and hold to highlight that number value and then type in the 50 and press enter. Next, we're going to work with something that we haven't done yet, which is vertical scale. One of the things that you'll see in magazines is that oftentimes the text is stylized by stretching out the letters to maximize the impact they have on the eye and the reader. To do this, you use the vertical scale tool. So this is the one that is an uppercase T with a double-edged vertical arrow to the left side of it. So it's going to be right here underneath the bridge and then the Adobe Stock icons at the top. We're going to change this value to 105, and I'm going to click my arrow up just so that you can see how it changes. So I'm going to go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And notice how the letters are now stretching out. They're still maintaining their properties that we've set, but we're giving them a bit more of an edge and more of a focal point as the masthead. Next, we're going to change the tracking value. So the tracking value is going to be this icon with the V and the A in a white box, and then a horizontal double-edged arrow underneath it. We're going to change this value to 210. So tracking means that we are moving the letters farther apart. And mastheads typically have either really close letters together or they're spread out a bit like this for an impact. So you can choose. The other thing that I want to note that we'll look at a bit later is that you can choose 2 separate letters like this and just change the tracking between those 2 if you're trying to achieve some type of special effect. Now we're going to change the font color to a darker green, sort of like a forest green color. So with the text tool active, highlight your text. And then either in the vertical toolbar, which mine is for some reason on the right now, but it should be on the left like this, or up in the options toolbar where you see your fill and your stroke boxes, you can double click on the fill box and then your color picker will appear. Then you can choose any forest green color that you wish, or some type of darker green. So I'll go with this one. And the code, if you want to use it, is 004B0A. Then when I'm finished, if I click out of it, my font now has that color. One of the things that you'll want to take note of and play around with is that there is a difference between filling text and adding a stroke. You may mean to add a stroke, and that's okay, but make sure that if you don't, that your stroke is turned off. So right now, in my options toolbar, I have it turned off, and it's below my fill box. There is another resource that I want to make you aware of for your independent work. So what you're probably noticing is that there's a trial and error process when you're choosing fonts that will work. And that's because you have to see what it looks like with all your elements before you commit to it. There is a program called FontDoc, and it's a small piece of software. It doesn't occupy too much on your computer, and it loads all of your fonts on your program into a rich text document, and then it shows you what your text, you can type in this, for example, and it'll show you what it looks like in different fonts as a preview. So it's a really good source to cut out some of that trial and error, and then you can see from there what you want it to look like. Before we move on, one of the things that you'll notice in our text frame is that it is not touching the top guide and the bottom guide. So we set these guides just to kind of see what we wanted, and that this was the space we were reserving. In this case, this is what we decided we wanted, and so you can either change those guides or get rid of them if you want. I'm going to go ahead and leave them for now. But again, remember, your guides are an informal guide. They don't set your hard and fast rule. For section 3, we're going to prepare the images for the cover page. The entire image should fill the page, and the person should generally appear in front of the text that is in the masthead. And to do this, this is a kind of a stroke of Adobe Magic. So you're going to learn, how do we accomplish this? You have to prepare it in Photoshop first, but for the purposes of this exercise, I've prepared those files for you already so that we can just walk through the process. For future reference, what you're going to do in Photoshop is basically use the quick select tool to cut it out and refine the edges, and then save a copy of it along with one copy that also has the background. So if you haven't already, I want you to save the 2 files that have been prepared for the cover page to your computer. So that'll be 17 cover image full crop, and then 17 cover image full crop cutout. Before moving forward, make sure that you have those images in a place where you know where they are. So section 3, if I hadn't prepared the files for you, would involve preparing the images. But we're going to skip ahead to section 4 and adding the images to the cover page. So to do this, go up to File, and then Place. And we're going to begin by navigating to where 17 cover image full crop is. So click on that and then open. When you get out of that dialog box, you have your loaded cursor with a thumbnail of the image. Go up to the upper left corner, and you can either click in the upper left corner, or you can click and drag to create a frame for the image. So depending on how you work best and your computer, either way works. So you should have something that looks like this. And today we're working with one of my former students, John. He works at Under Armour now, but he is very much into North Face, which works out here in Oregon. So he's going to be the cover boy for our Athleisure Adventures magazine. Now, we might see that this image is slightly more pixelated than we'd like. So we want to fix the display performance before we move forward. Go up to Object at the top of the screen, and then Display Performance, and then High Quality Display. And then the display will improve so that you'll see what the general image should look like. And you can do that at any point for any image, remember that. Now this is covering up your masthead, but don't worry, we're going to fix that now. So with your image still selected, with the text tool or the selection tool, you can go up to Object, Arrange, and then Send to Back. And then it is behind your masthead. Did anyone have any issues doing that? Good so far? Okay. In the process of putting an image over the masthead or overlapping it, this next part is really important. So put a star by this in your instructions for future reference. Because the process won't work properly if you don't do step 3. With the image active, we're going to right-click on it. So anywhere on the image. And then we're going to choose Lock. What this does is it makes it so that you have a layer, so to speak, of elements on your page that you will be adding to, but that won't be affected by any future changes unless you choose to unlock it. The unlock image or icon is always going to be in the top left corner along the edge, such as right here. And it's a really faint little blue padlock, and so you have to watch for it, but it should always be in that same place. To unlock a image or any type of frame, all you have to do is click on the padlock. And then it unlocks and you can see the anchor boxes again. Now we are ready to input our cutout image. So again, go up to File and then Place. And then you're going to choose the cutout file that is a Photoshop document. So it should have a .psd ending on it. And, whoops, oh, so that is what happens when it's not locked. So I unlocked it, and then I did not relock it. So if you did not relock your image, relock it. Okay, now we're set to go. So there's a demonstration of what we don't want to happen. Then we're going to place our other file. So your cutout image, and then open. So again, you can either place it in the upper left corner, or you can draw an image or object frame. I just kind of draw frames by default. When you scroll back up, now he is partially covering the masthead, just like you would see in a traditional fashion magazine. The trick here is, just as we talked about before, you have the image as you want it, perfectly sized in Photoshop. Then you save a copy of that, quick select him out of it, refine the edges, and save it. Then you overlay it on top, and it appears as though you have somehow cut out the image and allowed it to be on different layers. So that's the trick about how they achieve that in magazines. But here's what I want you to notice. In these files, if you look up at the top here, you can see a bit of overlap between the two layers of images. This was done on purpose because I want to show you that it's really important to do a precise quick select and crop when you're doing this technique. So make sure to avoid things like this, unless you like the effect of it. It could work for some, that you're doing a really precise selection. As soon as you're satisfied with the placement of the cutout image, then I want you to lock that one too. And that way, we now have that in place so that it's not going to move. If you only want to include an image behind the text or beneath it, or you don't want to have these double layers, you don't have to use this, but I want you to know how to do it in the event that you want to. And then you could skip ahead directly to placing and arranging your images as you wish. Most of what we have left to do, as you can see, is just placing our cover lines and various other images that fill out around the cover image or overlap on it. So again, as we've talked about before in previous class sessions, in design, truly first and foremost is about layout, above all else. To begin this process, one of the things that I find helpful is after I've gotten something set, such as my masthead and my cover image, I think that it's helpful to remove the guides that I've created for the masthead because I like the way it is now. So this isn't in the instructions, but it's a helpful hint if you want to get rid of them. Layout, create guides. And then check the remove existing ruler guides box in that menu. And it will remove what you had created. So just make a note that if you want to get rid of what you've done previously before you start a new section, which I think is very helpful because otherwise you have way too many lines in place, just go up to Layout, Create Guides, and then check the Remove Existing Ruler Guides box. And then you're good to go. For section 5, we're adding our cover lines. To get started with that, choose your selection tool. And the first thing we're going to do is use our sample magazine cover image again. So I'm going to click, hold, and drag that image on top of my page. And now John looks like quite the ladies' man. But we are actually going to bring this to the front so that it's laying completely on top. So to do that, we go to Object, arrange, and then bring to front. And now we've got what we want. So here's what we're gonna do. To create sections for our text, we are going to drag and drop guides from the rulers to frame all of the text on the sample magazine page. So for example, I'm gonna click, hold, and drag on my ruler at the top of the screen, and I'm gonna place a guide at the top of this 398. I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom of the 398. And I'm going to continue to do this both horizontally and vertically until all of my text is guided. I'm actually going to zoom out just a bit so I don't have to keep scrolling up and down so much. This is one way that you are going to be planning your layout, particularly for a cover, but also this works for articles that are a little less conventionally shaped. So you can then decide exactly what you want and where you want. And some of them are going to overlap or look similar. So as I'm dragging and dropping to frame the Michelle Obama, etc. text, it's going to fall in line with some of these others that I've created. But we're going to put this image side by side with our cover so that we can gauge where those boxes start and stop. And then now that I've got all of my horizontal lines, I'm going to do my vertical lines. So I'm going to drag one to the start of power. I'm going to drag one to the end of power. And I'm also going to drag one to the end of women because that is something I want to take into account with length. I'm going to frame the 398. And notice how the line that ends with women also lines up pretty well for the major moves for summer section. And so I can just leave that line there and it works for both. Okay, so we have our guides in place. Did everybody do that okay? All right. Now, pretty much the rest of what we need to do is filling in these sections so that our text is in place. Before we do that, we need to move our sample magazine cover image off to the side though. So I want you to click, hold, and drag with your selection tool active. But instead of moving it more off to the side, I want you to place it side by side so that it's touching and lined up perfectly to the side. The other thing you can do, I don't typically have too much trouble working with these many guides, But if it is confusing to your eye, you can always back up and work with a couple sections at a time. And then that way you know that you are going to put things in the correct place, but still save space for other things. So how many people feel like working with guidelines in this way is helpful? Do you feel like you would work better if you had fewer lines? Okay, so let's back up, because this is all related to how your workflow is best, and everyone does it a little bit differently. So we're going to use our remove the guides portion again, because I want you to do this in a way that feels comfortable to you. So we're going to go to layout and then create guides, and then remove existing ruler guides. And then we'll create them a couple sections at a time. And then now my guides are away, so we can focus a bit better. But to do that, remember that we're going to have to keep moving the sample magazine back and forth off of it. So just be prepared to do that. So let's just do, if we move our image back onto the page, let's create guides for the 398, the power, and the women. So I have those three sections framed. So now I can move my sample image off to the side again. Okay, so we're going to move on to step 4, and this is where we're going to type in our text, and then we're going to make the specifications to design the text. For part A in step 4, we're going to go to the box where 398 was placed in the sample image, and we're going to create a text frame using the text tool, and then type in 120. So you know where it goes because you have your sample image side by side and can look directly across at where it should be placed. So I'm going to type 120, but it's very, very small. I'm going to highlight it, change the text size to 72, I'm going to change the font to Century Schoolbook. Tell me if you have that one, Mac users. No? Oh my goodness. I'm 0 for 2 so far. Okay. So you're just going to choose something that looks a little bit curvilinear like this one. Just try and approximate it the best you can. And then if you need to make adjustments to the specifications to make it fit in the box, you can. Then I'm going to change the leading, which is just below the text size, to 100. I'm going to change the tracking to 60. And I'm going to change the vertical scale, which is the uppercase T with the vertical double-sided arrow on the left of it, to 160. And then I can use my selection tool to reposition the numbers in the box as needed. For the font color of this 120, we are going to use the eyedropper tool. So highlight the text with the text tool, and then choose the eyedropper tool in your left vertical toolbar.
To unlock the background image so it can see it to pick up the color, and then it will let you.
And then for the moment, just for ease, you can either, with the selection tool, unlock the image, and then do it that way with the text tool. Yeah, so if you unlock your image, if you're having trouble with it reading the color, go ahead and unlock it, and then make sure to relock it so you don't make any other changes to it, because we don't have to sample, at least for now, we don't have to sample anything else. So you can either lock it again or leave it unlocked until the future step. I will leave that up to you. I want you to lock the text frame. So right-click in the text frame and then choose Lock. There is an option if at any point you feel you have too much locked down and you want to change things. You can go up to Object and then unlock All on Spread, and then work with the components individually again. So there's always that option if you want to back up with your locking. For part B, in the box where power was placed in the sample magazine cover image, we're going to create a text frame with the text tool and type in the word snow. And again, it's going to show up really small. So I'm going to highlight the text and start making my changes. I'm going to change the text size to 108. I am going to change the font to Century Gothic. Mac users, do we have that one?
Yes.
Yes and no? Okay, I'll take that win. Okay, so if you don't have Century Gothic, then I want you to choose something that looks sort of a little bit chunky, but linear, the way that this Century Gothic looks. So just try and approximate. The next thing we're going to do is bold the font. So the little drop-down menu underneath the font selection in the options toolbar at the top of the screen, choose bold. The leading is going to change to 126. The tracking, which is the VA in the white box with the double-edged arrow underneath it, we're going to change that to -70. So that highlights how much more you can draw the letters in for impact. And it looks much more similar to what you see on the Glamour cover with how close together the letters are. What you'll notice if we select off of the word snow, The O and the W still look a little bit farther apart than the other letters. So I'm going to select those separately, as we were talking about earlier. I'm going to change the tracking here to -100. And then it looks more uniform. And I'm going to highlight this so that you can see it a bit better. Then we're going to change the vertical scale to 103%. And we're going to change the font color by highlighting it and double-clicking on our fill box to bring up the color picker with this color, which is 40 AD 48. And then you can click OK. We're going to repeat basically the same thing again, but with the man replacing women in the box below it. Before I move on, I'm going to lock this in place. And then I can move on to part C. So with my text tool, I'm going to draw a text frame in that box where women was. And I'm going to type man with a capital M and then an exclamation point. Then I can highlight it and start making my changes. The text size is going to be 118. The font is going to be Century Gothic. So if you had a replacement for Century Gothic, use that same one again. We're going to bold the font. We are, oh, I forgot to enter a leading value here. We're going to leave the leading as is. We're going to change the tracking to 40. The vertical scale is going to change to 105. Notice how close together in the sample magazine image the P and the O in power and the W are together. So we're recreating that with our vertical scale with the SN and the M. And if you ever get confused or forget which icon belongs to which value, just hover over it and it will tell you what it is. And then we are going to change the font color to the same as snow. So you can either sample the color with the eyedropper tool from the word snow, or you can use the color picker, whichever works best for you. So if I'm entering it in the color picker, I'm choosing 40 AD 48, and then click OK. And I have that one done now, so I'm going to lock it in place. Remember to lock something that you have to select the selection tool first and then right-click on it. In the box where Michelle Obama, etc. was placed in our sample cover, we're going to type John Connor. But before we do that, we need to draw some more guides for our next sections. So I'm going to start over with a new section. I'm going to go to Layout, Create Guides, and then Remove Existing Ruler Guides. And then I can start over with my sample cover. So let's draw a box for where the Michelle Obama text is, some guides there. And then let's draw lines for the text below Power Women. And that should probably be good for now. If you feel like you can draw the other lines, you can. We have 2 other sections after this, but this is probably good for now. Then I'm going to move my sample cover off again. And in the box where the Michelle Obama text was for Part D, I'm going to choose my text tool, draw a box, and then type John Connor. And you probably will do this already because of the way the guides are positioned, but you should draw the text frame so it's nestled above the NOW in snow, the way that the Michelle Obama text was. With my text tool active, I'm going to highlight this text, change the size to 23, change the font to Century Gothic, and to continue what I'm doing, I'm going to flip over to page 6. Bold italicize the font. So that's the menu underneath the font dropdown. And there's an option that says bold italic. You can't choose bold and italic separately, so this allows you to choose them together. How are we doing? Questions?
Yeah, I have one.
Yeah.
I lost the magazine cover to a right. I don't know where it is. The Power Women, so now I can't make my guidelines.
Okay, so what I would do if you can't find it is just reopen 17 Start and copy and paste it back into your file.
Okay.
Did anyone else lose their image? Good so far? Okay. So continuing with John Connor, I am going to change the leading to 26, the tracking to -30, and the vertical scale to 114. And then the font color is going to be the same again as the one in Snow and Man. So this time I'm going to use my eyedropper. Actually, I'm not, because I have things locked down. So I'm going to use my fill box and the color picker. So I'm going to choose 40AD48 and then click OK. Now, one thing you'll notice is that our text here for this name is a bit smaller than the box is taking up. So then your option is to increase the text, or if it's the way that you want it, you can just leave it as is, choose the selection tool, and move it down in line with the N. Because remember, we're using our guides as just that. It's a guide, and so we don't necessarily have to match the size exactly. Oftentimes that can be more for placement, especially when you're learning it and creating an assignment like you will be. And I am happy with my placement at this point, and so I'm going to lock this text frame. Remember when we worked on our color trend report exercise that we had text frames that were nestled together and we had to ungroup them? If you ever find that you need to do that when you're working on this exercise, I've provided those instructions as a refresher in the event that you need to do that. So right underneath the font color where it says remember, it walks you through how to uncouple those text frames. Then I'm going to move on to part E. So this is going to be in the box where on the sample it says why these three friends are teaming up now. I'm going to choose my text tool, and then I'm going to draw a text frame that starts closer to the edge, as this one does, and then stretch it out to where our guide was, and it should be the line that's just right before the 2 and 120. And in that box, I want you to type the North Face Creative Director enters the athleisure arena. So now with my text tool active, I'm going to select this text that I've just typed. I'm going to change the text size to 15. I'm going to change the font to Century Gothic, italicize. Then the leading is going to be 12. The tracking should be 0. And the vertical scale should be 111. There we go. Now notice that this text is a little bit bigger on our sample cover. So again, this is a judgment call for you. Do you want it to be taller? Do you want it to stretch out more? Those are the creative decisions that you're going to need to make with your assignment. But this gives you the tools to know how to do that and how to make those judgments. And then we're going to change the color. So I'm going to double click for my color picker, and I'm going to enter 4D192C. So I created a complementary color scheme with the Adobe Cooler application. So that's another tool you can use when you create your color theme for your publication. Then we're going to move on to part F. So to do that, I need to get rid of these guidelines and add more. So I'm going to go up to Layout, Create Guides, and then remove existing ruler guides. And I'm going to move my sample page back on top. And I'm going to draw the guides for my last two sections. So where it says major moves for summer, I need to outline that. Whoops. And then I also, for my very last one, I need to add guides around the one health check you must do. And then I can move my sample page off to the side again. So now for part F, we're going to take the text tool and draw the frame right under 120 in that box we just established. And we're going to type the text so that it appears on 3 separate lines. And in the list I've provided there with the asterisk, the backslashes indicate where you should start a new line. So we're going to type New Year, and then enter, and then resolutions, enter, for the gym. Then I can take my text, highlight it, and start to make my changes. I'm going to change the text size to 21. And I am going to change the font to Century Gothic. And notice now, this is an instance where the specifications that I want are different than the magazine cover is showing me as a sample. So I'm just going to choose my selection tool and adjust it down so that I can see all the words. So you're always free to do that and step outside the guides as you have them set up. Then I'm going to go back to my text tool and highlight everything to keep going. I'm going to align center, bold the font, and then keep the font color at black. For our final cover line, we're going to go to part G in the box where the one health check you must do was placed in the sample magazine cover. We're going to type the latest crop of activewear brands. So I'm going to choose my text tool and draw that frame. And I'm going to size mine a little bit bigger than the guides. And then you can flip over to page 7. We're in the home stretch. Again, for this part, we're going to type the text so that it appears on 4 separate lines. So the backslashes you see there indicate line breaks. I'm going to type the latest, enter, and then crop of, enter, then activewear, all one word, enter, and let me zoom in so you can see this more close up. And then last line is going to be brands by itself. Then using the text tool, I'm going to highlight everything so that I can make my changes. The text size is going to be 20. The font is going to be Century Gothic. I'm going to align right. Bold the text. And leave the font color as black. Now notice again, I can choose my selection tool to reveal all of my text to meet my specifications. One of the things that might happen to you in an industry job is that you will get a pack that tells you this is the size, this is the font, and you are responsible for creating the layout as it's been specified. So it might be this way where you have specific font sizes or fonts and you have to make your text frames work for that. So that's one of the reasons it's good to know how to go back and forth and play around with it via trial and error like this. So I'm just going to stretch it out until I can see everything here. And then we have all of our cover lines. Now, one thing that I want to note that you might notice is missing is if we look at our sample magazine page, it has a barcode. There are ways to create barcodes, and you can absolutely look up those tutorials on YouTube and there's lots of sites if you just search it on Google. However, it's not required for your assignment, and I think that it might even work better if you don't include one. So I'm going to leave that up to you, but we're not going to go over that in class. Now we've come to the last part of our exercise. So section 6 is adding a flash. To begin, choose the type tool and then draw a medium-sized text frame to the left of your page, just somewhere off in the pasteboard. And it doesn't have to be a specific size, just approximate for now. When you click once or have your blinking cursor already present after you create the text frame, I want you to type, "Is athleisure a fad?" ? On one line, and then hit enter and type Alexander Wang weighs in. Then you can select the text as you've done with everything else and choose the font size as 15. The font should be Century Gothic. It should align center. And then bold the text on only the first line. So, is athleisure a fad? Next, we are going to choose the selection tool. And then double click in the fill box in the options toolbar at the top. So currently, it probably says that you have no fill. We're going to change that. In the color picker, I want you to enter the value 63 DD F5. And then click OK. Now you have the start of your flash. We're going to now use something that we haven't yet used in InDesign called Baseline Shift. So with the text tool active, choose the Baseline Shift icon in the options toolbar. So it's going to be this one that has a big A and then a little a with a line pointing up underneath it. It's right under the vertical scale icon. And we are going to press the down arrow just a couple times, maybe three or four. And notice how the text now doesn't bump right up against that top line of the text frame. So this helps you to balance out your text. And then, as our last thing before we position it on the page, choose your selection tool and stretch out the anchor boxes on the side. Just so that it is longer and we have more to work with when we place it. Now with the selection tool active, we're going to rotate it. So hover with the text frame selected, hover your mouse outside until you see a cursor that looks like this curved double-edged arrow. And then I want you to click, hold, and drag the frame up until it reaches a value of 20.5. And you should have the little box that tells you what the degrees are as you're moving it. Then you can use the selection tool to click, hold, and drag your flash onto the page. So remember, oftentimes a flash overlaps the masthead text. So you can position it anywhere you like, but you need to make sure that there are no corners of your flash visible. So it needs to look like it's wrapped around with no visible 90-degree edges. So if you need to, keep stretching it out and repositioning until you get that effect. It doesn't necessarily have to stay centered. So if I left it like this right now, that would work okay. It just depends on the effect that you want to have with your publication. As soon as you're done, you can click out of that. And I want you to walk through the steps. So revisit exercise 16 and export this as a PDF. So how do we export as a PDF? Does anyone remember? We go to File, right?
Adobe PDF sets.
Yes, exactly. So File, Adobe PDF Presets. And then we're going to choose High Quality Print. You're going to save this as 17 Final. And then you can click Save as soon as you have that in place. And you're going to have another menu that comes up. Everything can pretty much stay in effect as a default, but I want you to make sure that you have the box checked View PDF after exporting. And then you can click Export. And you should, when you're finished, have something that looks like this. So you have just now created a magazine cover, and this will give you a sense of what you're going to be doing as one part of assignment 3.